The rain came down in thick sheets the night Evan Wycliffe was cast out. The Wycliffe estate, a sprawling mansion of cold stone and glass, gleamed under the storm, its towering windows reflecting the lightning that split the sky. Inside, the family sat in the grand dining hall, the air thick with tension. At the head of the table, Marcus Wycliffe's face was tight with fury, his voice slicing through the room. "You were reckless, Evan. You cost us everything, the deal, the merger, the reputation. How do you expect this family to recover?" Evan sat rigid in his chair, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched. "It wasn't me," he said, his voice low but steady. "I told you I wasn't even in the building when the fire started." His mother, Evelyn, perched at Marcus's side, her lips pinched, her gaze hard. "Stop lying. We've seen the reports. Your keycard was used. Your signature was on the access logs. You were the last one there." "But I didn't." Evan's protest was cut short by his father slamming his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the cavernous room. "Enough. Pack your things and leave. You are no longer a part of this family." Silence fell over the table. The other Wycliffes, cousins, aunts, uncles, looked away, avoiding Evan's gaze. No one spoke up. No one questioned Marcus's decision. Evan rose slowly, his hands shaking, his face pale. "I'll prove it," he said quietly. "I'll prove it wasn't me." But Marcus was already turning away, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Get out." Evan left that night with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a head full of questions. The rain soaked him as he stood at the edge of the estate, looking back at the towering house that had once been his home. He had spent his whole life preparing to take over the family empire, to inherit the power and wealth that came with the Wycliffe name, but now he was nothing, disgraced, accused of a crime he hadn't committed. In the weeks that followed, Evan drifted through cheap motels and dingy apartments, his mind racing. He retraced every step from the night of the fire. He scoured news reports, bribed employees, searched for surveillance footage. He uncovered discrepancies, passwords that didn't match, security footage that had mysteriously disappeared, keycards that had been duplicated. It was clear someone had set him up. But the Wycliffes wouldn't listen. His calls went unanswered, his letters returned unopened, he was cut off from the family accounts, his name scrubbed from business records. The Wycliffe family had closed ranks, their power and influence sealing him out. Evan realized the truth in a cold, hollow moment. His family didn't care if he was guilty or innocent. They just needed a scapegoat. And he had been convenient. That realization burned into him, hardening his resolve. He disappeared for 5 years. The Evan Wycliffe the world had known was gone, replaced by a man with a new name, a new face carefully crafted by subtle changes. Shorter hair, a leaner frame, glasses that shifted the shape of his features. He became Caleb Price, a quiet, unremarkable consultant who built a reputation for efficiency and discretion. Caleb ingratiated himself with the Wycliffe's oldest rivals, the Grangers. The Grangers were ruthless, ambitious, and had spent decades locked in a cold war with the Wycliffe Empire. They welcomed Caleb for his expertise in corporate espionage, his ability to dig into competitors' records and expose weaknesses. They trusted him because he delivered results, leaked reports, financial irregularities, vulnerabilities in supply chains. What they didn't know was that Caleb's real target wasn't the competition. It was the Wycliffes. From his new position, he slowly gathered information. He dug into the Wycliffe's financials, uncovered shell companies, offshore accounts, quiet payoffs. He mapped the web of power and influence his family had spun over decades. Each piece of information was tucked away, cataloged with meticulous precision. Caleb moved through the world with a quiet, controlled patience. He attended Granger's strategy meetings, always listening more than speaking. He gained the trust of key players, learned their plans, fed them just enough information to keep them leaning on him. Meanwhile, he fed their ambitions with targeted leaks from the Wycliffe Empire, carefully orchestrating small collapses, contracts lost, key clients poached, whispered scandals that eroded the Wycliffes' standing. Each move was a quiet blow, a subtle shift in balance. The first public crack appeared during a gala held by the Wycliffes, a grand affair filled with political figures, celebrities, and wealthy elites. Caleb attended, blending into the crowd under a false identity, his sharp eyes watching every interaction. A leaked memo from an anonymous source, his handiwork, exposed a bribery scandal tied to Marcus Wycliffe's latest overseas deal. The media descended, cameras flashing, questions flying. Marcus's carefully crafted facade cracked as he stumbled through denials, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Evan watched from the edge of the crowd, a thin smile tugging at his lips. This was just the beginning. The Wycliffe name still clung to life like a stubborn weed, but it was a shadow of its former self. Marcus, once the embodiment of ruthless success, had been reduced to a cornered animal. He made desperate phone calls, offering partnerships to old enemies, trying to rally anyone willing to prop up the crumbling empire. The boardrooms were filled with tense silences and thinly veiled contempt. The Grangers, who had long been kept at bay by Wycliffe dominance, now moved in with precision. They acquired half-built developments, took over shipping contracts, and lured away loyal executives with promises of stability. Caleb orchestrated these strikes, offering the Grangers carefully curated intel that always arrived just before Wycliffe defenses could be shored up. Evan, hidden behind Caleb's constructed life, became indispensable to the Grangers. He handled sensitive negotiations, provided insider knowledge, and always seemed to anticipate the Wycliffe's next move. His growing influence made him a quiet power player in their circles, but he never sought the spotlight. His revenge wasn't about fame. It was about destruction. He arranged for anonymous sources to leak Marcus's private financial failings to major news outlets. The articles exposed gambling debts, secret loans from unscrupulous lenders, and hidden offshore accounts. The revelations painted Marcus not as a shrewd businessman, but as a reckless, desperate man hiding behind a crumbling legacy. Evelyn, meanwhile, tried to salvage what was left. She hosted charity galas in rented venues, her designer gowns a sharp contrast to the fading wealth behind them. She pleaded with old friends, spun stories of bad luck and betrayals, but the smiles grew thinner, the handshakes colder. One evening at a Granger-hosted event, Caleb found himself standing near Evelyn, who was surrounded by a few remaining sycophants. She didn't recognize him. He watched her closely, seeing the tension in her jaw, the tightness in her shoulders. He could almost feel the weight of her crumbling world pressing down on her. "I hear the Wycliffes are struggling," he said softly, his voice carefully modulated. "Must be difficult to watch everything fall apart." She turned, startled, her eyes narrowing. "Do I know you?" Caleb gave a polite smile. "No, just an interested observer." He let his words linger, a subtle echo of his past, then walked away, leaving her staring after him with a faint, unsettled frown. The final moves unfolded with calculated precision. Caleb arranged a quiet buyout of Wycliffe's remaining assets through shell companies and intermediaries. Factories were shuttered, properties sold off, loyal employees laid off without warning. The Wycliffes, who once presided over boardrooms and private jets, were reduced to a single property, a modest townhouse in a fading neighborhood. Marcus, stripped of his wealth and influence, spent his days pacing the small living room, muttering about betrayals and conspiracies. Evelyn sank into silence, her sharp socialite veneer cracking into quiet despair. One morning, a plain envelope arrived at their door. Marcus opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no signature, just a list of dates, times, and transactions, the entire map of the orchestrated collapse. At the bottom of the page was a single sentence. "The son you cast out played the long game." Marcus's hands shook so violently he dropped the paper. Evelyn picked it up, reading it with widening eyes. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of realization crushing them. Caleb stood outside, across the street, leaning against a lamppost. He watched as Marcus stumbled out of the townhouse, his face pale and contorted in rage, scanning the street as if trying to spot the ghost of his son. Caleb stayed in the shadows, his expression calm, unreadable. He didn't need to confront them, he had already won. He had dismantled the Wycliffe empire piece by piece, poisoned their name, drained their wealth, and left them powerless. They would spend the rest of their lives haunted by the knowledge that the son they had disowned had been the architect of their ruin. And no one would believe them if they tried to speak the truth. Months passed after the final collapse of the Wycliffe empire. The family's once mighty name faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals, fresher catastrophes. In the quiet townhouse where Marcus and Evelyn Wycliffe now lived, silence reigned. The curtains were always drawn, the air stale with old perfume and dust. Their phones rarely rang, their mail dwindled to bills and foreclosure warnings. Evan, Caleb, knew they were broken, but he wasn't done yet. He had learned over the years that true ruin wasn't just financial, it was personal. It was the hollow echo of a name that once commanded power, but now inspired nothing but pity and scorn. He wanted Marcus and Evelyn to feel it every day for the rest of their lives. Caleb arranged for one final gesture. He called a small local paper, posing as an anonymous source, and fed them the full story. Every secret, every betrayal, every shadowy deal that had brought the Wycliffes to ruin. He gave them names, dates, evidence. The paper ran a front-page exposé not on the business collapse, but on the personal corruption at the heart of the Wycliffe dynasty. It painted a portrait of a family that had clawed its way to the top through lies, manipulation, and ruthless ambition. It detailed how they had cast out their own blood, turned on each other, and ultimately been destroyed by their own hubris. The article included statements from former employees, anonymous sources, and records Caleb had leaked over the years. It was thorough, brutal, and impossible to ignore. The story spread like wildfire. Major outlets picked it up, each adding their own layers of commentary and analysis. Social media exploded with discussions, hashtags, and heated debates. Former allies of the Wycliffes distanced themselves. Charities quietly removed their names from donor walls. Their final, thin threads of respectability snapped. Eveline collapsed in the living room, sobbing into her hands as the news played on their outdated television. Marcus sat motionless in his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face pale and waxy. His empire was gone, his reputation obliterated. "Who did this?" Evelyn whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Caleb stood on a rooftop across the city, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky bled into shades of crimson and gold, a silent blaze of color that mirrored the quiet destruction he had orchestrated. He thought back to the night he had been cast out, the rain soaking through his coat, the weight of betrayal crushing him. That night he had vowed to dismantle them not with a furious strike, but with a long, methodical game. And now, as the sun set on the Wycliffe's legacy, he felt not triumph, but a deep, cold satisfaction. He had become the architect of their ruin, the quiet force that had hollowed out their world from within, and they had never even seen him coming. Caleb left the city soon after, his work complete. He used one of his carefully crafted identities to purchase a small home in a coastal town where no one knew his name. The house was simple, with weathered wood and a wide porch overlooking the sea. He spent his days reading, walking along the cliffs, and watching the waves crash against the rocks below. In the quiet, he found a kind of peace he hadn't known since the night of his exile. The bitterness that had driven him for so long slowly faded into a quiet resolve. He didn't need the Wycliffe name anymore. He didn't need their approval, their wealth, or their legacy. He had proven himself, not to them, but to himself. One evening, he sat on the porch as the sun dipped into the ocean, the air crisp with salt and wind. He held a thin, leather-bound notebook in his hands, a collection of his own reflections, ideas, and observations from the years he had spent dismantling the empire that had once defined him. He had written it not for publication, not for acclaim, but as a record of his journey, a quiet testimony to the power of patience, precision, and resolve. As the light faded, he closed the notebook and set it aside. He didn't need to look back anymore. The White Cliffs were gone, their legacy reduced to ashes and whispers. Marcus and Evelyn would live out their days in obscurity and regret, haunted by the son they had discarded, the son who had proven that power built on lies would always crumble. Caleb stood, stretching his arms toward the darkening sky. The wind tugged at his hair, the scent of the sea sharp and clean. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the cool air, and let it out slowly. He was free.